Hello and welcome back to Bourbon and Bullets. Well, 2023 might possibly have been the worst year ever for Hollywood. And that's saying something. Because after all, let us not forget 2020, when the economy was put into an artificial coma and nobody was allowed to go to the movies. Okay, so that aside, because that's got nothing to do with Hollywood. That was a force majeure, or whatever you want to call it. Other years that could be more legitimately compared, where it's just based on the industry and not events outside their control, still don't compare to 2023. Some people have talked about 1922, when there was a lot of scandals that really rocked Hollywood, or 1929 or 1930, when there was the transition from silence into sound. Probably the most comparable years would have been the early 30s, 31, 32, 33, the depths of the Depression. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the attendance numbers, they don't even compare to the horrible year that was 2023. So I think it's safe to say that, barring outside events, 2023 was the worst year ever for Hollywood. And what's worse is that there doesn't seem to be any inkling to change on the horizon. We have major studios, Disney, the world's largest studio, Disney, the world's second largest studio, Warner Brothers, that are teetering, not so much for Disney, but Warner Brothers, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. And Disney is not in good financial shape. They have a huge cash flow from their parks, so that helps keep them alive. But things are not rosy in the Magic Kingdom. Okay, so now to start with, on top of everything, just to do some housekeeping here, yes, they did have an actors' strike for 120 days, and they did have a writers' guild strike for 150 days. Two strikes that couldn't have come at a worse time for their own industry. These people went on strike to get money from something that isn't making any money, and that is streaming. Streaming was not the golden goose that Hollywood thought it was going to be. And another thing, okay, so let me just do a little history here. If you look at the amount of big box office flops, you will see, like if you go back to the beginning of Hollywood, even if you just take the post-war era, if you go from 1945 to the present, you will see from then till now, you will see very occasional flop. You'll see Cleopatra in the 50s, which was a huge flop and cost 20th Century Fox most of their studio, which became Century City in Los Angeles. Then you'll see in 1980, you will see Heaven's Gate, which destroyed United Artists as a studio that was created in the 1920s by a coalition of huge silent film stars: Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, I forget his name. Anyways, so you'll see that. Then later in the 80s, you'll see Ishtar, the horrible flop done by Elaine May, starring Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman. And then you'll get Waterworld in the 90s, Kevin Costner's huge flop. Anyway, so you're seeing the pattern here. They were few and far between up until about 2010, when, if you look at it, you will see that big blockbuster box office flops became not a rarity, but became something that was almost a yearly event. Now, maybe they weren't, huge flops, but you can count on one hand, before 2010, you can pretty much count on one hand the number of really disastrous flops. In 2023 alone, you can count on one hand the truly, I mean, and among the biggest flops ever, the Marvels, Indiana Jones 5. I mean, those two right there are probably pretty close to the biggest flops in Hollywood history. And then I guess you have Elemental or Elements, whatever that stupid Pixar movie was. It's the worst performing Pixar movie ever. So obviously it's also a big flop. And then we've had a few other. I mean, I guess Wish was a minor flop, so not huge flops, but still, to have two of the largest flops in Hollywood history in 1 year, and then have a couple other minor flops, that alone is pretty bad. And like I say, it's not like this is something that is only happened in 2023. We're talking about this has been, as most of you know, most of you that go to the movies and have a even a passing knowledge of pop culture, this has been the trend for over a decade now, and there is nothing on the horizon that seems that Hollywood wants to change course, despite the fact that clearly this is not what audiences want. People are sick of girl bosses. People are sick of gender swap and race swap characters. I'll give you a good example of a good race swap character. Denzel Washington in the Equalizer series. Now, it's a shame that he didn't start the Equalizer series 10 years earlier. And there would have been probably 6 successful movies out of that franchise instead of 3. He's a great actor. He's superior, and but more to the point, everybody knows that Denzel Washington was not cast in the Equalizer movie because he's black. He was cast because he's a great actor. He's a very appealing actor. Everyone likes him, and for good reason. He's just one of those guys that has, screen presence. It's actually something that is, again, wrong with Hollywood, is that is going away, that screen presence. So then I'll give you another example of the more common gender swapping or race swapping, in this case race swapping, casting. It hasn't come out yet, but everyone's expecting it to be a flop. Rachel Zegler in the new Snow White, the remake of the Snow White film, which was supposed to come out this year, now isn't coming out until 2025. The most unappealing actress probably ever. She was in the remake, Steven Spielberg's remake of A West Side Story, another huge flop. Like I say, kind of a trend these days. She was cast not because she's a great actress, not because she has screen presence, not because she's attractive, simply because she's not white. I mean, she's Latina. So they can go, oh, great, so Snow White, who was, the original fairy tale, so called because she had skin as white as snow. No, we can't have that. Can't have that in 2023 or in movies going forward. So have to have a Latina actress. Yeah, and how's that working out for Disney? Boy, they wish they could take that one back. And then on top of it, of course, they can't have 7 white dwarves. They've got to have 7 diversity hires. So it's basically Snow Brown and the 7 diversity hires. That movie probably cost, it was in the can. It was made. So probably $200 million. They're reshooting the whole thing. They're CGIing out the diversity hires and putting in CGI dwarves, which means, 7 dwarf actors got jilted out of a great role. So they're probably going, thanks, Disney. It's just crazy. But anyway, so let's get back to, what is really been at the base of the Hollywood race to the bottom, and that is, the rampant feminism and the girl boss syndrome. Yeah, I mean the gender. I mean that's more the cause of the gender swapping. The race swapping hasn't actually. I mean, yeah, there's been some really disastrous roles because of it, like the aforementioned Snow White. But that hasn't been as big of a problem as just the whole feminist girl boss gender swapping thing. Take and we'll look at Indiana Jones 5, a movie nobody wanted. Absolutely nobody. Nobody wanted Dark Crystal over 10 years ago. So certainly nobody wanted Indiana Jones 5. Kathleen Kennedy had to get her paws on it. This is a woman, if you don't know the history of Kathleen Kennedy, she's been around in Hollywood forever. She started out in her early 20s, right out of college. She knew Spielberg, she knew Lucas, she fetched coffee for them. She has just been around these guys forever. And it must have been just galling her seeing these guys, not much older than her, just making fortunes, just raking it in, becoming super famous. Directors were, in that era were not really that famous, but they became famous for their movies. And here she is fetching coffee for them. But so she was in the industry for decades, climbed the ladder, and then finally she was around so long, she ends up at Disney, and Disney puts her in charge of Lucasfilm after they bought it from George Lucas, her old boss. And of course, what is she? She was on a mission. She was on. We're going to erase all of the male features of Lucasfilm. All the heroes will be girl bosses, and all the villains will be evil white men. And audiences never warmed to it in the first place. It was never a popular formula to begin with. And then so then we have that. Then we have the LGBTQRST UV blah blah blah, whatever, the alphabet agenda, and nobody likes that. That's 5% of the population. Yes, I mean Gen Z. They all like to identify. They all claim that they're non-binary. They're bi, blah blah blah, whatever. But it's a trend, and they don't really. The vast majority. The sexuality hasn't radically changed in the last decade. They will grow out of their confused state of their late teens, early 20s, and end up in traditional relationships, and that's just what's going to happen. And it will go back to the real hardcore alphabet people are still just 5% of the population, and the trans population is less than 0.5% of the population. Truly trans people, not the so-called. I mean, sorry for the aside. What the frick is non-binary? I mean, look, I've said this a million times. If you're an adult, you're not hurting anybody. Whatever, you do you. But I mean, non-binary is just basically saying I want to get on I want to be a trans trender, and so, but I don't really want to change my sex, so I'll say I'm non-binary. Which is what we used to call androgynous. Remember when it used to be a skit on SNL called It's Pat? Yeah, anyway, so that agenda also has failed. Nobody wants to see gay and lesbian characters not thrown in our face. Nobody's interested in that. I mean, they always have, the gay kiss now. They had that in Star Wars movie, and then this year, no, was it this year? No, it was last year. Strange World or something, another Pixar flop. Like I say, I mean, the flops just keep coming. And these big studios, I mean, they can only keep doing it for so long. And then, 2023, they barely could get out a successful movie. I mean, they put out flop. I mean, it's a new term now, the flop buster. They keep putting out these huge movies that flop, or at best they break even with the global box office. How much longer can they do that? And the thing is, like I keep saying, they don't have any inclination to change direction. If you were, I don't know if you heard this, but they're trying to the new Marvel movie, the latest Marvel character they're trying to do is a reboot of Blade, made famous in the film world by Wesley Snipes back in the 90s. And I mean, kind of fun. I mean, the first one was kind of fun. Then they got progressively worse, but whatever. Um, they made a few bucks. So the new Blade, of course, they want to reboot it and make Blade a minor character in his own film franchise, and of course, again, it's have the girl bosses running the show. I mean, how many flops do they need for before they wake up? Now, I mean, I guess the pinnacle of this, of course, was the Marvels, where the writers and director were total diversity hires. I forget her name, the black one. I mean, she was hired because she's a black woman, not because she's talented, not because she's done anything successful, not because she has a vision or wants to do anything new, because she's a black woman and she hates white men, hates straight white men, and so makes a movie with a bunch of very unappealing characters. These characters. I mean, Captain Marvel used to be Miss Marvel. Now it's Captain Marvel, and then they turned Miss Marvel into the first Muslim character in Marvel, and then the Rambo woman. I mean, they've all had comic books that failed multiple times. They kept trying to push it in the comic form so. I mean, imagine the thinking. This is the backwards thinking of today's Hollywood. It's, well, we've got a bunch of characters in the Marvel stable. They're all underperforming characters. They've never been able to get them successful as a publishing venture. Oh well, let's make a $300 million movie about them then. That's the thing. Instead of saying, okay, we own Marvel, Disney, we own Marvel now. So what are the most successful characters? And let's make movies around them. That's how they started out, doing Iron Man. They didn't have the X-Men, which were the most popular Marvel characters. So they didn't have that, and they didn't have the Fantastic Four. So they went the next level down, which were the classics, Hulk, Iron Man, Thor. So great. Captain America, of course. Great. And they hit and miss, but generally did pretty good. Did some good movies in the early Marvel universe. And then this is what they do. This is where they go with it. We're just going to kill off all those characters or turn them into comic relief, and then have a bunch of unpopular characters and try and make blockbusters about them. It boggles the mind. I mean, it really does. I mean, it's in TV as well. I mean, remember, I don't know, I mean, 10, 12, 50, even 20 years ago, they started talking about the TV renaissance. I guess it started with The Sopranos and kind of went from there, and then into Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones up until the last 2 seasons. And, there was TV shows that people watched and talk about, and even on network TV. I mean, if you remember, the early the first few seasons of The Office, first few seasons of Rick and Morty, first few seasons of Archer. I mean, because I say the first few seasons because, like with all these shows, they're good and edgy and funny and different for at most 5 seasons, usually about 3 seasons, and then the showrunners get lazy and they bring in diversity hires and it goes to hell. But there was a lot of good, Lost. I mean, up until the final 2 seasons, got us all excited. It's funny to think that even on network TV, there were shows that we used to get excited about and watched and talked about on then new social media, and now everything's just a joke. I mean, Jeff Bezos spends $1 billion on acquiring the rights to Lord of the Rings and producing a show, The Ring. I can't even remember the name of it. It's so forgettable. And again, his priority is not. You think? I mean, the guy's got a lot of money, so I guess $1 billion isn't that much to him. But still, you would think $1 billion investment. You'd think you'd want to do something good. Instead, the priority was diversity hires. It just, like I say, it boggles the mind. it's their priorities are gay kisses, diversity, transgenderism. Um, Again, getting back to TV, the new Doctor Who. I mean, again, they you would think that after the horrible Jodie Whittaker seasons where they turned the Doctor into a woman, and lost millions of viewers, then they bring back an old Doctor, and what do they proceed to do? Humiliate him, bring in a transgender character that obviously is a guy that they all have to pretend is a gorgeous quote unquote woman. They have to make the Doctor gay. Then they launch a new Doctor who's not only gay but he's also black. Um, if he comes out, if you find out he's Muslim, he's got the trifecta. And what's the result? Millions more turn out. How long can these people keep doing this stuff? I don't know. I guess, see, just to wrap up, what this is, it's funny, as a Canadian, it's funny to see this in Hollywood, because this was always the knock against Canadian television and Canadian filmmaking. We used to all roll our eyes. I mean, there'd be the occasional movie that squeaked through the cracks that was actually entertaining. But this is how Canadian filmmaking went about. They did not care about acting. They did not care about story. They didn't care about anything except checking off, all the checks. Gay and lesbian characters, visible minorities, all the way down the line. And they would, whatever it took to shoehorn in those diversity checks, story be damned. And so that was always the joke of Canadian film and television. And then Hollywood adopted that. I mean, I knew Hollywood producers that came up here to Vancouver to make shows, and talk to them, and they would kind of laugh at the whole Canadian approach to film and television. And now they're doing it. Now they're following that disastrous recipe. And what do they get? Disaster. Except and this was the thing, they'd always say, oh, well, Canadian film and television couldn't compete with the U.S. because, we didn't have the money. And which, obviously, I pointed out was a joke, because at the same time they were saying that, we would see great low-budget films come out of the U.S., come out of Europe, the U.K., great low-budget TV coming out of the U.K. I mean, this was well past, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. I mean, why couldn't that be made in Canada? I mean, it's basically one set. I mean, it doesn't have to be, why couldn't you have a bunch of gangsters running around Winnipeg or Toronto? Obviously you can, but, in Canada they don't do it until it's successful someplace else, and then like I say, the way they do it is like they copy the success in the US and the UK, but then they ruin it because of all the diversity check marks they have to get. All right, I think you get the message on where I'm going with all that. Wasn't really much of a review of films. I'm sorry. It was just kind of a rant, and I mean, what is there to say? They're all the same. So, and nothing seems to change. I guess it's more of, a Hollywood death watch sort of a thing going on. So anyway, that's going to do it. I hope that somehow, somewhere, we find some interesting entertainment in the new year. If there is, I'll certainly do a post on it, and we can talk about it. So that would be interesting. Although I think it's probably going to be the opposite, and more of just laughing at all the joke film and TV projects that keep coming out of the pipe and keep losing Hollywood millions, tens of millions, and actually even hundreds of millions. So that's going to do it for today. Until next time, this has been Bourbon and Bullets.